We begin today the Gemara on Daf Zayin Amud Beis, 10 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. The Gemara here is discussing the halacha of payment when a mazik pays. We learn from the pasuk Meitav Sadeh, Meitav Karmai that he has to pay from the best of his properties, which is called idis. So here the Gemara is going to continue discussing how do we evaluate this idis based on whose standard. When the Bezdin will evaluate the payment of the mazik, he's paying with a property that he owns, and he has to pay idis the best. How do we evaluate this? Do we evaluate it by the properties that he has, and he's going to have to give his very best, even if on the standard of the world b'chlal, this is much better than idis in the standard of what's called idis in the world. You shouldn't have to give such a good property. But no, we go by his standard of what he has. So let's say this guy is very rich and he has a property that's beyond the standards of anyone else. He still has to give his very best. Or no, we go by the standard of the world that what's considered to be a good property in the standard of the world, that's what he has to give. Okay, now the Gemara explains, according to who are we asking this shaila over here? We had before in the Gemara the machlokes between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva that discussed this matter. When you pay the mazik pays, does he have to give based on his own standard, with the mazik, or with the nizik, or as long as for the one that you're paying, the nizik is for his standard, it's called idis, then it's good enough. We had already this concept. So the Gemara explains. According to Rabbi Shmuel, this is not going to be a shaila at all. Because the Amma, what did Rabbi Shmuel say? The Rabbi Shmuel says that you always follow the standard of the nizik. So we had before, even if the ziburis, the worst property of the mazik, matches up to the standard of the best property of the nizik, so he's going to be able to pay with the worst property. So in such a case, you don't have to look at the world at anybody else. You go by what the standard of the nizik is. So in that case, there's certainly no room to ask any question according to Rabbi Shmuel. There are still Rishonim that say that even according to Rabbi Shmuel, in a situation where the ziburis of the mazik does not match up with the nizik, so then even Rabbi Shmuel agrees that you don't give him from your ziburis. You do have to give him from your idis. So even then, according to Rabbi Shmuel, it'll be a question. But over here, if it does match up, if your worst property matches up to the standard of his best, so then there's no shaila. So then you can give him your worst as long as it's according to the standard of the nizik. According to, are we asking the shaila here? Aliba de Rabbi Kiva. We're asking it according to Rabbi Kiva's opinion. The Omar, but the mazik shemina. Rabbi Kiva says that the mazik, he has to give his best, and he can't get away with the fact that for the nizik, his worst is considered to be that the mazik's worst is considered to be the best for the nizik. No, he has to give his best. Now, what does that mean? Meitav Sadeh Omer Achmane. When the Torah says you have to give your best, what the Torah is really trying to say with that is Lumutei the nizik. It's coming to exclude, don't just rely on the standard of the nizik. Torah is saying, don't be lenient. If this person that you damage happens to be a poor person, and for him you can get away very cheap, the Torah is saying, no, you can't get away cheap by looking at the standard of the nizik that's very poor. So you don't look at the standard of the nizik, but you don't necessarily have to give your very best if you happen to be very rich. You just go by the standard of the world. What's considered to be this? Or perhaps no, lumute dal menami. When the Torah says meitav sadeyu, it means literally you have to give your very best. It doesn't matter what anyone else's standard is. Amalei. So Rabbi answered, Rachmana Amar, meitav sadeyu. The Torah is clearly saying, according to Rabbi Kiva, you have to give the very best property that you own. And you have a svara to say that you don't go by your standard, you go by the standard of the entire world. Why should you say that? The literal pshat of the pasuk is you have to give your very best. Eisvei, so the Gemara asks on this from what a Braisa says. And here this Braisa will come and tell us the details regarding collecting a payment. And there's three different scenarios of collecting a payment. One is a mazik that we're discussing, the other is a bal chayv, a loan, and the third is the ksuba of a isha. When a husband has to pay out a ksuba, if he divorces her, so on. So these three different standards. So the Braisa says as follows. Ein lo yala idis, if a person only owns idis properties, only very good quality properties. So and he has to pay these different modes of payment, whether as a mazik or as a bal chayv or for ksuba for his wife. Kulan Gaivim and Idis. Whoever he owes money to, this is all he has. So they're all going to come collect from this Idis. Beinanis, if all he has is an average property, Kulan Gaivim Beinanis. So then all of these different people he owes money to will collect the Beinanis property. Ziburis, if he owns only Ziburis, Kulan Gaivim Ziburis. They all collect from that Ziburis. The point that we see over here is that you never say that if a person owes money and he doesn't have that level of property that really the person that he owes it to deserves, that he has to go and sell this property and go and buy a better quality property to pay that. There's no such a thing. Whatever you have, if this is all you have right now, so this is what you pay regardless of who you owe it to. Now, if he has three different qualities of property, the best, an average, and an inferior level, so then nizakin be'idis, the halacha of nizakin is that you give the best quality property, as we're learning here. Or balchayiv be'beininis, the balchayiv gets the average property, and the Gemara will soon bring the source for this, because really minatayra, a balchayiv can be paid with the worst quality. And ksubesisha biziburis, a isha that collects her ksuba, she gets only the worst because she's satisfied just with that. Rashi brings, we learned this in Gemara in Gittin, that when a woman gets married, so even though that she wants and she needs a ksuba, that she shouldn't be cheap in her husband's eyes if he wants to divorce her, but at the same time the Gemara says that more than a man wants to marry a woman wants to marry the man, and therefore she's ready to accept whatever it is, even ziburis. Now, idis ubeininis, what happens if the person only has idis and beininis? He only has a good quality property and an average. So then, how do they collect? So nizakin beidis, the nizakin gets his halacha, like he always does, he gets the idis property. And balchayiv, uksubesisha bebeininis, and the balchayiv that always gets beininis, and here the ksubesisha as well will take from beininis. Beininis viziburis, what if he has an average property and then as a Buddhist property, only these two, so then nizakin ubalchayiv bebeininis, the nizakin and the balchayiv are going to collect from the average property, uksubesisha viziburis, and the ksubesisha will get from ziburis. What's if he has only idis viziburis, he only has a very good quality property, and he has only a bad quality property, doesn't have anything in between. So nizakin be idis, the nizakin gets his halacha, which is idis, and balchayiv uksubesisha beziburis, and both the balchayiv gets pushed down to ziburis together with the ksubesisha that takes from ziburis. This is the braysa. So the Gemara now focuses on one of the cases of the braysa where there's an obvious question here. Ketani mia. What is one of the cases in the braysa? B'ntzia, in the middle case of the braysa, it says beininis v'ziburis, that if this person owns just an average property with the ziburis property, nizakin or balchayiv bebeininis, then what happens is, so for the damages, nizakin you pay with beininis, and the balchayiv also gets beininis. And the ksubesisha b'ziburis, only the ksuba goes down to the lowest quality property. The question over here is though, what does this mean that a person owns two properties, and you're saying that one property is beininis and the other property is ziburis? Why is one property beininis? If he only owns two properties, so if you look at what he owns, so one is ziburis and one is idis. He has two properties. One is his best and one is his worst. How could you define it as beininis? So if you're going to say that the standard of how we evaluate properties goes by this individual himself of what he owns, so tasa beininis shaloi ki idis, so this property that the braysa says is beininis, why are you calling it beininis? This is his idis, this is his best property, and if so, the halacha should be different than what the braysa says. V'yitcha balchayiv etzel ziburis. So then the balchayiv can't collect from the beininis property, even though usually a balchayiv gets from beininis. But over here, he only owns two properties. So what the braysa calls beininis is really idis. So the balchayiv should be collecting from ziburis together with the ksubesisha, and only the nezikin should get paid from this beininis property, which is really idis. So here, basically, what we're proving is, how could this braysa call it beininis? Because we're not going by the standard of his properties. He only owns two. If you're looking at him as an individual, he only owns two properties. The beininis property is his idis. But if you go by the standard of the world, as the Gemara before said, b'shel olam hen shamin, so then this is in the standard of the world. This is a beininis property. So therefore, the balchayiv could come and collect from this property. That's the raya from here. Says the Gemara, not necessarily. Hacha b'maya skinon. What it's talking about over here is the reason why we're saying that this property that he owns is a beininis property, even though we're going just by his standard. B'shaloi kagoin shahaisaloi idis umachara. At the time of the loan, he did own a third property. He owned a idis property. And if at that time he owned the Idis property, so the Baininus property that he owned already became Meshubid, there was a lien on that property for the Baal Chayv. The Baal Chayv, the property that becomes Meshubid to the Baal Chayv goes according to the time of the actual loan. And at that time he owned the Idis property. And later he sold it off. And now that he sold it off, so he's left just with Baininus and Ziburis. But we're classifying it as Baininus, even if B'Shaloi and Shaman, even if we're going according to his standard, because he previously, at the time of the loan, owned Idis as well. Rav Chisda answered this as well, that in this Braisa, he previously had Idis and now he sold it. Says the Gemara, it's logical to say that this must be the Pshat in this Braisa, because there's another Braisa that says that the halach is different. There's another Braisa that brings up the same case. Baininus v'ziburis. If this person only owns Baininus and Ziburis, so there the Braisa says nizakin b'Baininus. Only the nizakin is paid from the Baininus property. But b'chayv uksu b'ziburis, the b'chayv gets pushed down together with the ksubah to collect from the worst quality property. So now you have a contradiction. There's a contradiction of these two Braisas. The previous Braisa said that the Baal Chayv, the loan, is paid from the Baininus property. And this Braisa is saying, no, the Baal Chayv gets pushed down to the Ziburis property. The way to answer these two Braisas here that say a different halacha, as we explained, the previous Braisa, he originally had a better quality property. He had an Idis, and therefore the Baininus is that shibud that the Baal Chayv collects from. And the second Braisa we quoted, where the Baal Chayv cannot collect from the Baininus, is because he did not previously own Idis. So this Baininus is his best property. If we're going by his standard, so that is Idis. So the Baal Chayv gets pushed down to Ziburis. He doesn't have a right to collect from Idis. And now the Gemara brings another few solutions over here for the contradiction of these two Braisas that we just brought over here, in this case of when he owns only Baininus and Ziburis. But if you want, I'll give you another answer. That idi shaloi haisaloi idis umachara. That in both cases, both of these Braises, it's not speaking about the fact that he once owned idis before and now he sold it off. It's not mentioned at all in the Braisa. Right? And the Gemara here is answering this and saying that really we could say that b'shal olam hein shaman, that we evaluate by the standard of the world. We don't evaluate by his own standard. So if we evaluate by the standard of the world, so then we can understand what it says in the first Braisa. The Baininus is called Baininus by the standard of the world, even though for him it's his best property. In the second Braisa, when it says that the Baal Chayv does not collect from Baininus, why not? Why shouldn't he collect from Baininus? If you go by the standard of the world, it's Baininus. So the Gemara explains, V'loi kashya. This is not a question, because the shavya Baininus shaloi ki idis da alma. If the person's Baininus has the value like idis da alma, so then that Baininus is according to the standard of the world, is considered to be idis. Right? So even if this person owns also idis, but this Baininus that he has is the idis. That's what this Braisa is saying. Over here the case is that his Baininus is the same like the idis of the world. So therefore, the Baal Chayv only takes from the Ziburis. And in the case where his Baininus is not like the standard of the idis of the world, his Baininus is like the average standard of Baininus in the world. So the Baal Chayv takes from the Baininus. That's the second Braisa. Now, a third Pshat the Gemara says, "V'boy seime."
It's not basically they're talking about.
And true. This answer here is saying that we don't go in the literal. We're not teaching the pasuk literally that he must pay by his standard. You go by the world standard. V'boy seime, according to another answer here to explain these two Braises. Idi v'idi. I can tell you that in both Braises, the case over here is kagoyin shehoisa beinus shaloi. The Baininus that he owns is the same standard as the Baininus of the entire world. And he only owns two properties. That's what we're talking about here, right? Baininus and Ziburis. Now why, where does the Baal Chayv get from? Does he get from Baininus or does he get from Ziburis? These two Braisas are arguing as follows. Marsavar b'shaloi hein shaman. This holy boy that was asked before, do you go by his standard or by the standard of the world to define the level of the karka that's being paid? This is the machlekes of these two Braisas. So Marsava b'shaloi ein shaman. So the second Braisa says that you go by his standard. If you go by his standard, since he only owns Baininus and Ziburis, the Baininus is his best. So we push away the Baal Chayv to get from Ziburis. He doesn't have a right to collect from the best. And the first brisa says, no, that you go by the standard of the world. So therefore, if he owns Baininus and Ziburis, the Baininus, by the standard of the world, is Baininus. So the Baal Chayv collects from Baininus. A fourth Pshat the Gemara says, Ravina says, B'du'ula pligi. The argument over here, when a person only owns Baininus and Ziburis, whether he takes from the Baininus or he takes from the Ziburis, this is a general machlokes, not only in this case, but it's b'chlal a machlokes, whether we accept what Ula says. And here the point the Gemara is going to say is, this whole thing that a Baal Chayv collects from Baininus is not Menatayra. Menatayra, if you own money, you can pay with the worst quality of your properties. So that Ula came and said that Rabbanan were masakin, that you should that he should have the right to collect from Baininus. So the two brises are arguing whether there is such a takanim with the Rabbanan. Sorry, but the Ula pligi, the Ama Ula, because Ula said Dvar Torah. If you look in the Torah, you'll see Baal Chayv b'ziburis. A Baal Chayv you can pay alone with the worst quality of properties that you have. Shenema, the pasuk says b'chutz tamaid, that when you come to collect a loan, or if you're coming to collect and the person doesn't have money to pay, so you're coming to take a mashkin, a collateral, so the pasuk describes it by saying, stand outside, the person that you're collecting this from, he'll bring you out the mashkin, the collateral, outside the house. Why is the pasuk saying all of this? What's this description? What it's telling you is, just like it is the nature of a person that if he has to give up something, an object for a collateral, so what does he do? He gives the least qualities, gives something that he doesn't need so much. That's what he gives as a mashkin. If he's going to allow you into your house, you're going to choose an expensive item for this mashkin. But the pasuk says, no, let him choose the worst quality. So the same thing is also, if you're paying from a karka, you have the right to pay from the least, from the worst quality karka that you have. What's the reason why we say always that a Baal Chayv, when you pay a loan, you have to pay from an average quality property, it's a takanim d'Rabbanan, so that people should not see the door locked on them when they want to come and borrow money. Because a malva will say, I know what's going to happen, I'm going to lend this guy money, and then he's not going to have what to pay me, and then he's just going to give me a garbage quality property as a payment. So to prevent such a thing, Chachamim instituted that you must pay with something which is at least Bainis, average quality. So the Gemara says, now mar isle takante dola. So the brisa that says that you collect, that the Baal Chayv collects from Bainis, it follows this takana that Ulas just said here. Umar lesle takante dola. And the other brisa that says that the Baal Chayv, the second brisa that says that the Baal Chayv only collects from Ziburis, is because we don't follow the takana of Ula. And therefore we just go the way Menatayra, you can pay whatever you want, you can pay even Ziburis. We learned in the Braisa as follows. So this is talking about a person that owes money, a malva, he owes money, and now he owns different properties. He owns three quality of properties that we spoke about till here: the Idis property, a Baininus property, a Ziburis property. Now Machar or Machran le'echad. He sold off all his properties to one person, to one buyer. Or he sold them l'shleisha b'nei yadam ke'echad. Or he sold it to three people, but he sold it to all his properties to those three people in one day. So then what happens is, kula nichnasu tachas habaylan. They all take the place of the owner himself that owned this money, and what that means is the same exact standard of payment that applies to the owner himself will now apply to the buyers. By the owner himself, as we said before, for nizakin you pay from the best, for the Baal Chayv you pay from average, Baininus, and for the Ksubasishi you pay from Ziburis. These individuals, or the one person, or the three people that bought from him all at the same time, the same halacha applies when it comes to collect from them. However, if he sold it to three people, and it was on 3 different days, one after the other, then the halacha is, kulan, all the people that he owes money to, even though usually there's a halacha of what standard quality property they can take, they all come and collect from the last person that bought the last property, even though the last property may be the worst quality. What's the reason for this? We'll see soon in the Gemara. Rashi here brings that the halacha, we learned this in Masechta Gittin. There is a takanas chachamim that if you owe money to someone and you have properties in your possession, but then there's also properties that you previously owned, and there's a lien on it also for this money that you owe, but now you sold it off. So the person that you owe money to can't come and say, I want to collect from that property that you sold off. because it's a better quality property and that's what I deserve. It doesn't work that way. If you still have a property in your possession, which is what's called b'nei chayrin, it's free and clear, it's right here. You don't go to mishubadim, you don't go to properties that were sold off already. So over here, even if the person did sell off all his properties, but when he sold property 1 and property 2, property 3 was still available in the person that owes it in his possession. So that was where the person that's coming to collect had the right to take from. He can't take from 1 and 2 that was sold off already. So even after property 3 is sold off, still you can come and push him and say, go to the last one, because when we bought this property, we knew that there's another property that's still available for you, and that's where you're supposed to collect from. You go to the achron, the last one that bought. Ein loy, if that property does not have enough to collect from for what's owed, then you go to the previous one that was sold. And ein loy, if there's not enough to collect from there either, then you go to the first person that bought the properties, and you go in that order. You always collect from the one that was still available last. Okay, that's the halach of the Braisa. Now the Gemara explains, in the beginning of the Braisa, it said 2 things. It said 2 cases. It said a case where you sold to 1 person everything, and then it said a case where you sold to 3 people your properties, but all on the same day. The Gemara explains, why does the Braisa have to say both of these cases? You sold it all to 1 person. Hey Chidomi, what does the Braisa mean by this? Does it mean you approach 1 person and you tell him, I'm selling you all my properties, and you sell it to him all at once? So now, why does the Braisa have to say this? Now the Braisa says the case where you're selling 3 properties to 3 different people, one after the other, all on the same day though. So over there, what does it say? Now, the Ikkel Meimar, over here, there would be room to say, Chad Minayu Kodim, that 1 person bought this property in the morning, the other one bought it in the afternoon, and the other one bought it later in the day. So you could say that the person that bought it in the morning, bought his property in the morning, can say, don't come to me. When I bought my property in the morning, there were other properties available for you to collect from that were only bought later. Go to those properties. That's what you would think you could say. But nevertheless, we don't say that. Omre, the Braisa comes and says, Kula nichnasu tachas habaylim, that they all together take the place of the owner, the original owner, and the first one that bought the property in the morning can't push them off to the other ones that bought in the afternoon. You just go by the standard that the way the Bailam would pay. The Mazik takes from Idis, the Balchayv takes from Beinanis, and the Ksuba takes from Ziburis. Right, so Rashi explains the reason why that is. Why can't he push him off to the other guys that bought after him? Because when it comes to buying in the same day, it's as if they bought it all at the same time. Because when you look at a shtar, this is a property, and you sell it, and you write into a document, the shtar doesn't give any hours of the day. The shtar just says it was bought on Chavav Cheshvan. Doesn't say the hour in the day. So if you look in the shtar, we see that they all bought it on the same day. That's what the Braisa is saying. So if that's what the Braisa tells me regarding 3 people that bought it on the same day, so if so, machron le'echad mibaya, is it necessary for the Braisa to say when it's 1 person that bought everything at the same time together? Obviously, he takes the place of the owner. Why should I think he doesn't? He bought everything together at the same time. There's no room to change the standard of collection of the payment the way it was by the owner. Ella says the Gemara Pshita, so it's obvious that you have to say bezeh achazeh. When it says in the Braisa that when 1 person bought all of the properties from this one owner, that he didn't buy it all at the same time. He bought 1 property, a day later he bought a second one, and a day later he bought a third one. And in that case, the Braisa is saying that this 1 person that now has all the properties of the original owner, that he takes the place and the standard of collection remains the same like the original owner. But the question is why? What's the difference when 3 people bought 3 properties on 3 separate days? The call chad v'chad amalei, each person here could say, don't come to me, go to the last one that bought the property, because we left you over that last property to collect from. So the same thing over here, hi nami, even if it's 1 person that bought all 3 properties, but he didn't buy them all at the same time. Akol chad v'chad leima, for each one of these properties that he bought, he could always say, leimele, he could tell the people that are coming to collect, I left for you place to collect from the last property. So what the Gemara is assuming now is, let's say the last property that he bought was the worst quality property. So that was the last one that was available. And he's telling the mazik that usually gets the best quality property, he tells him, don't take the best, even though that's usually what you deserve, but I bought the best, and when I bought the best, I left you Ziburis, I left you the worst quality property available by the one that owes it to you, so you have to go to the Ziburis. So the Gemara says we should be able to say that over here, even if it's one person that bought everything, but he left him that property available to collect. And says the Gemara, the case over here is, what was the last quality property that was left over? The best. It was Idis that was left over. Rav Sheshes also explained this. The best quality property that there was here was the best. So therefore, this person that bought all these properties doesn't want to push them off and say, go take the last quality property. Usually, it would be to his benefit if he bought the zibur is the last, so he wants to push him off to take the last. But over here, what was the property that was bought last? The idis. So therefore, he would rather keep it in the standard the way it was by the original owner. And he wants to give each one. He wants to give the baininess and he's going to give idis to the nezikin, but then he's going to give baininess to the balchayv and ziburis to the ksubis shisha. He doesn't want them to take the last because the last is the best. But the Gemara asks on this answer, wait a minute, if the last property that was left over is actually the best, so then if so, so let all the people that he owes money to come and collect from that last property. Not only the nizik that always gets it is, but what did it say here in the Braise? That the different individuals that collect, they all collect like the original standard that was supposed to get by the original owner. But why? Shouldn't we say that they get from the last property that was bought? And over here it's Idis. So let them all come and take from Idis from the last quality property. So the Gemara answers, no, there's a reason why they can't do that. Because Mishum, the Amalahu, because this buyer here that bought all these three properties, even though he bought the Idis last, but he can come and say, if you'll be quiet and you'll take like your original halacha that you deserve, then shaklisu, then what you're going to take, you'll get. But viloi, if you're not going to take from your original standard, the way you would get when it was by the original owner, what I'm going to do is ma'adron ishtaris the ziburis lemare, the ziburis property that I bought first, and I have a star that I bought it, I'll give that star back to the owner. And now what's going to happen? The ziburis property is returned, and that will be the last one available by the original owner. And then all of you are going to collect just from ziburis. Again, the halacha always is you take from the last quality property. So now what happened over here is he bought the ziburis first and he bought the idis last. So they all want to take from idis. So the buyer says, I have the option to just give back the shtar to the owner and make ziburis the last. You're all going to collect from ziburis. Taisus here actually even says he doesn't actually have to do this. Somebody should say he actually has to give back the shtar and rebuy it. So now the ziburis will actually be the last. Taisus says he doesn't even actually have to do it. He can just, the fact that he gives the shtar and makes believe as if he's doing this, he's basically saying that I have all of it in my possession. I have the power to position the ziburis as last. So that's a right that I really have. So therefore you could only collect from ziburis. Says the Gemara, if this is the svara that he could push them all off to ziburis, if so, what did the Braise say? That with this one person that bought all the quality, all the different qualities of property, so it said here that he pays all these people that are money is owed to them like their original standard, which means the Nizakin gets from Idis, the Balchayev gets from Beinanis, and the Ksuba gets from Ziburis. But the question is, if he has this ability to make this threat and to say that I'm going to push you all off to Ziburis, so Benizakin Nami Neimachi, so why can't he say the same thing regarding Nizakin as well? Why is the Nizik collecting from Idis? Why shouldn't he be able to say to the Nizik, you better take Beinanis? If you're not going to take Beinanis, right, I'm offering you better than what you can get. Why? Because if you're not going to accept Beinanis of average property, I'll push you down to Ziburis. Because what I'll do is I'll give back my shtar and make Ziburis the last property that I acquired. And if it's the last property I acquired, you're going to end up getting Ziburis. So he has this leverage over the nizik. So why is the nizik collecting from idis, from his original halacha, from his best quality property? In the Gemara here, it says that this question is on the nizik because he has this leverage that he can threaten him. But somebody showing Rashi here says that the question of the Gemara is only regarding the nizik because he doesn't have this kind of leverage regarding the balchayiv. The balchayiv, he's telling him right now, take ziburis. That's what he's telling him. And so the fact that he could give back a shtar and then make ziburis the last. So now he's telling him to take ziburis, and he's threatening him, if you're not going to take ziburis now, then I'll force you to take ziburis. It's basically the same thing. So the Shainim say that you don't have that question. Rashi says that actually. But by the Nezikin, he's telling him, listen, you want idis. I'm telling you, be happy with me giving you baininess, because otherwise I can push you down even to ziburis. That's the Gemara's question, according to Rashi Text. Other Shainim disagree, but this is how Rashi learns. Says the Gemara, this is a good svara. This svara is known as the svara of Ishaskis. If you're not going to be quiet, then I can take care of you. But the Gemara says, over here in this Braisa though, we must say that svara doesn't apply. As we see, the Braisa says that the Nizakin takes his standard of Idis. Why doesn't it apply over here? What this Braisa is talking about is that he can't do this. He can't give it back to the original owner. Why? Because the owner died. Beyasmi. The original owner passed away, and now all you have over here is Yisayimim. The Lav B'nei Pironinu. Now these Yisayim that are here, they don't have any connection to this loan anymore. They don't have to pay this loan. Why? Because when this owner died, the original owner that owed this money, he didn't leave any karkois that are meshubah to the loan. All he left is metaltlin. You don't collect any chay from metaltlin. So these Yisayimim don't have to pay anything. The whole shibud now is on this buyer. This buyer is the one that has these properties that are meshubed to the loan, to the nizik, or to the ksubah, and he's the one that has to pay everything. So he can't say, he can't use this leverage, if you're not going to be quiet, I'm going to give back the property to the original owner, and then I'm going to buy it back. If you give it back to the original owner, these Yisayimim are not going to have to pay with it. Yisayimim that buy a property after the father passes away, whatever property they get after the father passes away, does not become meshubed to any loans or any money that he owed. So this is not an option in our Braisa. So now the question comes back, the original question the Gemara asked over here. So why are we saying that the Gemara said that the case over here is that this person bought all of the properties from the original owner, but in what order did he buy the properties? He bought the Beinis and Ziburis first, and the Idis was the last property that he owned. So the Gemara's question was, if the Idis is the last property that he owned, why don't all these people that he owes money to go and collect from the last property, which is the Idis property? Why? That's based on a takana. The takana of Chazal is that the last property that was available is the property that you have to collect from. So why don't we apply that over here? So the Gemara explains as follows. El over here, the reason is Mishum Da'amar Lahu, because you can tell to these people that are coming to collect, why is it that Rabbanan usually say, you can't go and collect from properties that were already sold off if the person that owes money has b'nei chayrin. He has a property still available by him. The reason is Mishum Takan Tididi. This is a Takana Chacham instituted for the benefit of the buyer. That if the buyer sees and knows that when he's buying these properties, the seller still has other properties in his possessions, he knows that it's safe and sound to buy these properties, because whoever the seller owes money to will come and collect from that property that's still available in his possession. That's the reason for the takana. So it's all for the benefit of the buyer. Says the Gemara, but I know over here this buyer says, over here, this takana that was made for my benefit, I don't want it. Over here, what ended up happening? He ended up buying everything. He ended up buying the idis as well. So for him, this takana to say that you take from the property that's still available by the original owner, he doesn't want it. Because over here, it's going to come out then that they're all going to come and collect from the last property that he bought, which is idis. So if it's made for his benefit and he doesn't want it, he can reject this takana. Where do you find such a thing? As Rava has said, Rava said, a person that comes and says, if Chachamim instituted something for my benefit, and I'm not interested if for me it's not a benefit, Kagayin Zu, like this example, Shaimalei, we will listen to him. My Kagayin Zu, what is this example that he said? As Rav Huna said, the Omer Rav Huna says, a wife could say to her husband, Eini nizaynis, don't give me, don't feed me, don't provide me food, and my income I'm not going to give you. Usually Chacham instituted that her income goes to the husband, and in exchange the husband has to feed her, but she can refuse that. If she's making a good income better than whatever he gives her, she can say she doesn't want this deal. Same thing over here, this buyer can say, I don't want this whole takana that you collect from the last one available. Okay, the Gemara now continues on this very case now, how this would play out further There's another thing that the Gemara adds to this case. Now, Pshita, it's obvious regarding this case. Again, what's the case over here? A buyer that bought all the properties from the original owner that owed money, and he bought Beinanis Ziburis first, and then he bought the Idis last. What happens now if this buyer goes and sells to a second buyer the Beinanis and Ziburis that he owns? And Vishayir Idis Lefanov, and he leaves the Idis in his possession. So what happens? In such a case, the people that the money is owed to can all come and collect from this Idis property, from the best property. And why is that? Because this was the last property that was available by the original person that owes the money, and we always allow to collect dafka from that last property. Now the Gemara explains why is this different than the case that we just said. We just said that the buyer can say, you're making this takana for my benefit, so if so, I don't want this takana, and go and collect from the Beinis and Ziburis instead that I bought before. But over here the Gemara says that doesn't work. They all can collect from the Idis, which is last, because Ubeinis and Ziburis less nagabe. He doesn't have any Beinis and Ziburis anymore. The first buyer sold the Beinis and Ziburis to a second buyer. So he doesn't have that anymore. The matzi lemeimelahu, that he can go and say to these people that are coming to collect, Govu mi beinis ziburis, that I want you to collect from that beinis and ziburis, the leinichali betakante de rabbanon, and I'm not interested in what Chachamim made for my benefit. He can't do that anymore. He doesn't have beinis and ziburis in his possession. So in such a case, the people that are coming to collect are going to take from the idis that's left by him. However, what happened over here is in the reverse? The first buyer went and avol machar idis. He went and sold the idis property to a second buyer. And v'shayir beinis v'ziburis. And he left over beinis and ziburis by himself. What's the halacha in such a case? Could he say to the people that are coming to collect, well, I have beinis ziburis in my possession, and I want you to take dafka from the beinis and ziburis, not from the idis. Right? Is that what ends up happening over here? It's not the first buyer doesn't want this though. Do we say that in such a case they could come and collect from the beinis and ziburis, or do we say no? There is a takana de rabbanon that the idis was the last property that was acquired by the first buyer, and therefore they go and collect dafka from the idis. That is. What's going to be the halacha over here in this case? Okay, so again, the shaila over here is, do they collect from the first buyer, the beinis and ziburis, or do they collect from the second buyer, the idis that was now sold to him? So the Gemara brings two opinions about this. So Abaye thought to say that over here the halacha is going to be osu kulu govim idis. In such a case, they're all going to collect from the second buyer from the idis. They can't collect from the first buyer because in such a case, the first buyer is going to say, I do want the takana of the Rabbanon that say that you always collect from the last property that was available for you. Over here, it is for his benefit to accept this takana of the Rabbanon. Because he's the one that has the beinis and ziburis. The first buyer kept the beinis and ziburis for himself. He sold off the idis to a second buyer. That idis that he sold off was the last property available by the original owner. So for him now it is beneficial to follow the takana de rabbana that you always collect from that idis that was the last. So therefore he says, go and take from the idis, even though the idis is by a second buyer and not by me. But that was the original one that was by the owner available, the last one that was sold. So in such a case, he can push them off to take from the idis, from the second buyer. So Rava says about what Abaye said, no, it doesn't work this way. Why not? So before I read the Gemara inside, what Rava is going to say over here is, what's if the first buyer had bein ziburis and idis in his possession, and he bought the idis last? He has the option to say, I don't allow you to collect from the idis, even though it's the last, because I'm not interested in the takana of the chachamim for my benefit. This is not a benefit for me. So Rav is going to say over here, the point is, whatever right the first buyer has regarding these properties, when properties are sold to a second buyer, the rule is a buyer has the same power and the same rights as the seller, which is in this case the first buyer. So therefore, the same halacha that the first buyer could push them away from the idis, the second buyer could also push them away from the idis. So Rava says, what does the first buyer sell to the second buyer? Whatever rights he has over here in these properties, the second buyer is acquiring not just the physical property, but he's also acquiring all the rights of the properties as well. Now, the kiv in the ilu also gavi lekeach rishay. Since if these people come in to collect and they come to the first buyer, he can push them away and say that you collect only from the Beinis and Ziburis. Even though when he acquired the Beinis and the Ziburis, Akati Idis B'nei Chayrin Avoy, the Idis was the last property that he bought, and the Idis was still available at the original person that owed the money. And usually, the Ve'ein Ephraim Nechasim Mishivadim calls man the Ikki B'nei Chayrin. Usually, there's the kind of the Chachamim that you don't collect from a buyer when there's still property is available at the original person that owes the money. But nevertheless, what's the power of the first buyer? As we already said before, in this case, he can say to the people coming to collect, in this case, this takan is not to my benefit. If it was made for me, I don't want it over here. That's the power that the first buyer has. Like Keach Sheni, the second buyer has the same power. Nami Motzi Amalu, he could also say to them as well, Gavi Beinis Ziburis, even though he only bought the Idis, but he can say, go back to the first buyer and get the Beinis and Ziburis from him. The Chizavin, like Keach Sheni, whatever, when the second buyer comes and acquires, Adaipte, the Chos Chusa, the Havela Lirishan Begava, Zavin. Whatever power the first buyer had, he could push them away from the Idis. The second buyer has the same power to push them away from the Idis. And then they have to go to the first buyer and collect the Beinis and Ziburis. Okay, let's learn one more case over here. It says the Gemara, Omar Rava. Rava said another halacha. Reuven shemachar kol sadaisav l'Shimon. Reuven owes money to people, and he sold all of his properties to Shimon. And v'halach Shimon went to machar sada achas Levi. Shimon went and sold one of his properties to a second buyer to Levi. Ubaba chayiv the Reuven, and now the Reuven has lenders that he owes money to, and they want to collect, and Reuven doesn't have any properties left by him anymore. He sold all of his properties to Shimon, and there's one property that was now sold off to Levi. To a second buyer, that is. This Balchayv of Reuven, he can collect from the properties of Shimon, or he can collect from the property of Levi, from the second buyer. Now the Gemara explains when that is. Usually, when you have a first buyer and a second buyer, you never get pushed off to the second buyer. You collect from the first buyer. Why over here are we saying that this Balchayv, the lender, can go and collect from the second buyer? V'lo yamad, on this halacha said only elo the zavan beinanis. That's because the second buyer went and bought specifically the beinanis property. So the beinanis property is the kind of property that's mishubit to the balchayv. The idis and ziburis is not the kind of property that a balchayv usually collects. So the first buyer says that I specifically sold the beinanis property, but it's the beinanis property which belongs to you. That's one point over here, not one detail. But the thing is, though, he has an option. It's the Balchayv could come collect either from the Beinis property from the second buyer, because that's the type of quality property that's his shibud. But on the other hand, he could also collect from the first buyer, because the first buyer he's first, so he has the properties first. And he's the first one that you go to, so you can go to either one. If the second buyer buys idis and ziburis, then why should you go to the second buyer? The first buyer came first, and he has the bein in his property. The Amalei, because then the second buyer will say, Lahachi daiki v'zavni idis v'ziburis. I bought specifically the idis property and the ziburis property because I knew that you're coming. Because this is a arad lechazilach. This is a property that is not deserving to you. A balchayv only collects from beininis. Another detail the Gemara says about this, even when the second buyer bought a Beininis property, and we say now that the Balchayv could go to the second buyer, not only to the first buyer, and this was only said, if you bought all of the Beininis property from the first buyer, you didn't leave any Beininis property by the first buyer. So then the second buyer can't say, I left some Beinis quality property still by Shimon, the first buyer. If he bought Beinis property, but he also left over some Beinis property by the first buyer, by Shimon, so then the Balchayv can't come and collect from the second buyer, the Matzi Amalei, because the second buyer can say, look, I left Beinis property still by the first buyer, and go collect by him.